Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. Well, today I really wanted to work with some explosion powders and stencils together. So I am going to be doing some creating and finishing off some cards. Now, explosion powders can be called several different names. They are color bursts, they are pigment powders, explosion powders, they have lots of different names. Essentially, these are just made up of pigment powder and then mica powder because usually they have some sort of shine or that kind of element to them. And then when you add water to them, they literally burst into life. So I am going to be using these 3 stencils today, mainly because they're all quite different from each other. So hopefully that shows you that you can do this with any stencils. You just need to grab whatever you have in your stash already. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be adding a lot of water today, so I'm using some mixed media cardstock. Now, this one actually came as a freebie from scrapbook.com, and I really like it. This is heavyweight mixed media. This is 400 GSM or about 140 pound paper. It also comes in black, and I actually ordered that one after having a play with the white one because I liked it so much. Now I'm going to start off with the Hero Arts stencil. This is called Circular Grid, and I love the stencil. It just feels like one of those stencils that you could put anything through it. You could turn it into anything, and it just has a natural focal point. You could offset it as well. That would also look great. But anyhow, a couple of different ways that you can apply these explosion powders. You can either wet the paper down first and then add on the pigment, or you can add the pigment like I'm doing here and then add the water. Now, I have just got my stencil tacked on top. If you use something like a waffle flower grid mat, it might make the stencil sit a little closer to your paper, but I was happy with this as is. Now, with every single one of these, I am going to get the reverse print because there is so much pigment and color on the top of that stencil that I may as well use it. So that's why I cut down the paper that I'm using. And then this time I'm going to sort of print the stencil down there. I always take a piece of paper towel, press it into the back. That mops up anything that comes through the cracks, but it also keeps my hands a little bit clean, and it means that I get really good contact on the paper there. So I've got 2 different designs of each stencil. This one here, you're not going to get absolute perfection with this, of course, but I think this is a really stunning outcome for stencil number 1. This is the second one from Holtz. This one is called Sparkle Fade, and it really is sort of a distressed, it's very Tim Holtz, I guess, look. It doesn't have a complete, solid, beautiful, crisp pattern to it. So we were always going to get mixed results from this one. It ends up looking a little bit more just like texture on the background. But when you look at it closely, you actually can see those little diamond individual shapes, but you just have to sort of have a good look at it. And again, I'm going to print this one as well. Now, I will just mention that actually on my website, natashafootecreative.com, I created an entire card making class around all the different ways that you can use explosion powders because they are actually a really versatile product. And I feel like it's something that we kind of get in our stash and we're not 100% sure how to use it in more than one way. And it truly can be used in so many different ways. So I have an entire class. There's around 6 or 7 episodes. You don't need anything special in particular except for some sort of explosion powder. And of course, all the way through it, I give examples of what else you can use. Even if you want to take the class and get inspired from it, then you don't have to use the explosion powders either. Now, this one here I'm going to do with the Flowers stencil from Creative Expressions. This works out. There is a bit of a little bit where there's a little bit too much water and that gets a little blurry. I just dab up a little bit of that, but this is a pretty crisp impression and there's not too much ink on that other side, but it's worth printing, and it doesn't always have to be a complete background, but it can become a partial background as well. So you don't always have to have that perfect a flip of color. Now, if there's any big damp spots, I am going to mop those up, although it's not because I'm worried about the paper. The paper, I will just say, holds onto this beautifully. Now, let me just tell you, I very nearly went down a whole nother rabbit hole with this video because I was having some fun. So I have got out my gel plate at the moment, and I wanted to use explosion powders on your gel plate. You can use them beautifully as well. And I put down the stencil, and it sort of attaches itself nicely to the gel plate just because of that tackiness that it has. And then I'm going to run a brayer over it. So the explosion powders I have put, they are not underneath the stencil, they are just on top of it. So then I'm going to take some night coloured Dina Wakley acrylic paint, which is just a really, really dark navy colour, really, really dark blue, not black. But then I'm just going to, I waited about, I'd say 30 seconds to a minute for this to dry a little bit, let that explosion powder kind of settle in there. Again, we hadn't activated it with water or anything, but with this paint going on the back of it, I was hoping that the paint would sort of activate the shimmer and you would sort of get this shimmery glowy effect, I guess, because of the mica that is in that powder. And I wasn't disappointed, to be honest. As I said, I did actually go down a rabbit hole with this technique and I sort of changed, but I'm going to wrap this back around and finish off the original cards that we had started creating. So let me just tell you, absolutely explore with what you can do. You can see those mica powders there beautifully, and they are sealed in place using that paint for sure. So this is what we got once they all dried. These are looking fabulous. Even those, see this, it's really interesting the different flips you can get. Sometimes you prefer the one where you mop up the ink that was sitting on top of the stencil, and sometimes you can prefer the original stencil one. Now I will say it is hard to see the amount of shimmer and shine that is on these. It is a beautiful amount. It is really hard to show on camera, but it is stunning. I will tell you that for all of them, particularly the yellow as well, actually, in this case. So let's skip to and start making some cards. Now this one here, I could play with this one forever. I kept looking at it and as I said, I did get distracted, but I came back around to these cards. As you can see, my fingers are a little bit colourful. So I have this background here. Now I had done some colour blending to test out some ink. Popped it in my scrap pile and it's been sitting there thinking it's sort of too nice to throw out. Anyhow, this seems like a good opportunity to use it. I am taking the Sketched Leaves, I think it's called, from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to stamp this down on top, stretching those gorgeous colours. Now, I'm using the yellow background that I did with the Sparkle Fade stencil, and so I thought that I would stick with the yellows and oranges. I'm going to emboss this with some clear embossing powder just so that this doesn't go anywhere and it's got that nice little shine factor. This is a very shiny little card, and then I'm going to melt this with my heat gun, and then I'm going to fussy cut this out. Now this is really easy to fussy cut out. I am going to leave a little border. In this case it won't be white just because of the ink blending in the background, but I'm going to fussy cut that out. I have the Woodware Vintage Labels die set here. Now this coordinates with actually a few of the Creative Expressions stamp sets. So I got this, I've had some of their stamp sets for years and years, and then recently only discovered, not recently, but within the last year discovered that it has a die to go with it, and so I use that with it, but I also can use it separately because it just has some gorgeous labels. Then you can see I'm using the Plants and Vases set from Altenew. I think this one might be unavailable now, I'm not sure, but if it is available, as usual, I will link it in the description box down below here on YouTube. Just a gorgeous little sentiment there, but it was very, very popular, and it is one of my favourite stamp sets, so of course I'm keeping it, but I do think it has disappeared. Right, on to fussy cutting, and a good pair of fussy cutting scissors is worth their weight in gold. I love these little Cutter Bee ones, and I've had them for years and years and years, so it doesn't matter if they're new or old, but a good pair, nice and sharp with a little pointy end that can get in all those little nooks and crannies, is fantastic. And these are sort of tried and true, and you know when you just find a really good product and you stick with it because it's your favourite? Well, that's these for me. I really, really like them, and this leaf was, you know, it worked out really good with that ink blending in the background. I really like it. It did need to stand off the page a little bit, so I am going to do a little ripped or torn vellum edge there just to give it something to pop off. Now, if you really want to separate it from the background, what I suggest you do is you add foam tape behind the vellum, you know, and then you stick something else on top to hide the foam tape, and that gives it, if it lifts it up off the paper, you're going to make it more opaque, harder to see through. If your pattern is not too bold and you do want to be able to see the pattern through it, then you need to lay your vellum up against the paper. So that's what I'm going to do here. The pattern in the background is whilst it is busy, it's not too busy for what's going on. So you'll see that I just put the vellum right up against the background there. And again, just so that I avoid any bowing of the vellum and the paper, I am going to add some double-sided tape directly between the vellum and the paper. So no foam, but just the double-sided tape, because you can see it bows up a little bit there just naturally. So here the leaf is going to cover it up. So I'm okay about that. I won't need to see through it, but I just pop in a little piece there so that it sits down nice and flat and we can still see that pattern through. Then I also went around the borders with the same ink. Now I actually stamped out that leaf in some pinecone ink, which is a dark brown VersaFine clear ink, so it's a pigment ink, and that's why I was able to heat emboss it as well. And then for this one, I added a little bit around the border, a little bit of that ink around the border. I'm popping this down nice and flat onto my card base. I noticed a little splotch of ink on the other card base, so that's why I switched them over. I will use that other card base in another way where we're going to cover up that little splotch. And I've got my little label there that's going to sit on the vellum. The vellum's a little bit hard for you guys to see, but in real life you can definitely see it just fine. I add that little bit of ink around the edge as well. Now I didn't have a dauber with me, so I just used a makeup sponge folded in half, and that's perfectly fine for adding the ink. Just wanted a tiny little bit there around the edges just to match in with everything else. And then this was a super quick card to create. Once I had done those backgrounds, created those backgrounds, then this one came together pretty easy. And I actually really like this card. Simple, pretty gorgeous, a little bit of shimmer, sparkle, all the things. Now this one here, we're going to move on to the circular grid background that I created with the Hero Art stencil, and this is the first one where we put the pigment powders directly onto this. Now I have the peach collection of 49 and Market rub-ons here, and I'm going to use some of these just because this is a really busy background. It's a bold, dark, busy background that we have created, and so I really need to have a bit of contrast going on. So across the color wheel from blue is going to be oranges and yellows, and so I'm going to use that, in this case peach, as a nice contrasting item. Now some of these rub-ons are these gorgeous sort of foliage, these leaves I would say, so I'm going to pop a couple of these onto some white cardstock, fussy cut them out just because they're nice and easy to go around, and then these are going to be just a little bit of sort of foliage and create a focal point. Again, I'm going to use the Woodware vintage labels for all of the cards today that I create, just because, you know, once I've got it out, I may as well keep using the same set rather than having to search for new ones. I knew this needed a little bit of a border around it just to help it stand off. So I did use that ombre paper pad, and it's got that nice dark one. I could have absolutely have made one, but sometimes it's nice and easy to grab something that's already created. That might be something that is already created by a store, or it might be something that you've created earlier on and popped to the side, like the ink blended piece that I had in the first card. Then again, this goes onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card. I've got the vellum sitting flush with the background there, and then I'm going to use a sentiment from the Sketched Leaves set that I used on the first one, and this is going to be stamped onto one of those labels. I did use a blue ink. Again, this is a VersaFine clear pigment ink, so it's going to stamp nice and crisp to say many thanks. It matches some of the blues from the background in the pigment powder, and then I'm just going to pop these down. I don't go right to the edges because I don't mind a little bit of lifting and a little bit of dimension from the leaves, but I do want to make sure they're secure. So I need to have a good amount there. Then I have a little butterfly that I think I will add on to, again, some nice contrast. That vellum helps it stand out, and just two really nice cards made from these easy, gorgeous explosion powders with stencils background. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Let me know which one is your favorite, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Of course, I've got my card making class